Yes, hello, welcome back to the Rugby League Forecast podcast. My name is Connor Moran, and today I will be reviewing the Penrith Panthers 2025 season. And I think it's fair to say that it's the first grand final that Penrith haven't made since 2019. So 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24, they were in 5 grand finals, and 2025 was the first time since 2019 they weren't in a grand final. Now, in my personal opinion, I reckon a lot of people would see that as a failure. And I couldn't disagree with them more. I think the Penrith Panthers, to me, had an outstanding season. Considering they lost Taruva, Fisher-Harris, Luai, over the years, Kikau, Coruscant, Crichton, it just goes on and on and on. And they are just a phenomenal system. To be last after round 12, they lost to the Newcastle Knights and they finished in last place. Well, no, but they were last place at the end of round 12 is what I mean. Now, to go from that to then making the top 8, but then to get to a prelim final and to be up 14 points to nil in a prelim final, to me, is a fucking good year for a club. And Penrith just prove that they are unstoppable. And sure, Brisbane beat them in the prelim. They ended up winning the comp. But at the end of the day, they have so much more to give over the next few years. What really scared me as a rugby league fan is that after the Brisbane prelim final, where Brisbane came back and beat the Panthers at Suncorp Stadium, Ivan Cleary was asked, what does it feel like now that the dynasty is over? And he laughed and he said, what's over? And for me, watching that as a rugby league fan, that made me really nervous and scared as a supporter, going, you know what? Sure, they've won 4 in a row, but they've got more premierships coming over the next 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And Nathan Cleary, the captain, was sitting next to Ivan, his dad, the head coach, at the press conference. And Nathan Cleary just smiled and shook his head because he knows that there's more coming for the Penrith Panthers. And, in my opinion, for them to have that attitude, for them to know that nothing's over, goes to show that they will be up there again and again and again. And there's one thing having superstar players, but there's another having a system in rugby league, a good system at the club. And Penrith have the system at the club. And now all the clubs are copying the Penrith Panthers of what Phil Gould did at Penrith, getting a centre of excellence, the first centre of excellence in New South Wales built. Now all the other clubs are getting centre of excellences. And Penrith, there's no doubt that Brisbane will want to build a dynasty just like Penrith did. And there's so much that the Penrith Panthers get right. Now, I think it's fair to say at the start of the year, it was a slow start, without a doubt. But can you blame them? I mean, the players that they lost, there's no doubt that they lost James Fisher-Harris. Not just the way in which he makes meters and makes his tackles, and he's just a strong enforcer for Penrith on the field, but it's just his presence. I think they really missed his presence. His presence of being on the field, those younger front rowers looking up to James Fisher-Harris. He's the current captain of the New Zealand Kiwis, and for me, he was a huge loss. Taruva. I thought Taruva was a really underrated loss. If we remember Taruva at the Penrith Panthers, his kick returns were fucking unbelievable. He would just make meters and meters and meters. He would be so heavily involved. His work rate was unbelievable. And I think they missed that in the first half of the season. Blaise Talangi was expected to start in the 6th jersey at the start of the year, but his first game was actually against Melbourne in round 3. He came on from the bench. And for the second half of the year, he played in that number 6 jersey. And I thought did a phenomenal job in that 6 jersey. But there were concerns over Blaise Talangi. The reason why Penrith didn't start with him in the 6 jersey was because in the preseason, they were extremely worried about his defence and what they'd seen at training. Preseason training, they were concerned about his defence. They wanted him to get reps in New South Wales Cup and work on his defence before they gave it a go. Gave him a good go and consistent go in that number 6 jersey. But Casey McLean, I thought, was fucking unbelievable. Not overly experienced in the NRL, but I thought he did a good job. Jack Cole, for me, Such an underrated half in the NRL. Most people would hear the name Jack Cole and think New South Wales Cup player, reserve grade player. But for me, the games he played in the first half of the season for Penrith, he did a phenomenal job for them. There was a game where Penrith beat Penrith versus Melbourne. Melbourne won that game by 6 points or so. But Jack Cole came on, or Nathan Cleary got concussed. Jack Cole then moved to halfback. Blaze Talangi then came on, played 5'8". But Jack Cole directed the side around the park really well. I thought he's a really underrated player, phenomenal defender, and his kicking game really good. I thought he was really, really good. So I'm just going through these players, these younger players. For me, the reason why Penrith started slow was because they had younger players coming in that they also did a good job, but they had to get used to the system. Blaze Talangi, as I mentioned, he finished the season really well in the 5'8 jersey. Tom Jenkins, Milky Jenkins, I thought he was outstanding for the Penrith Panthers, but once again, not that experienced in the NRL. So they started the season with a lot of young players coming through the ranks, a lot of young players that they spent time and effort developing, and it was just a new era for Penrith in a way. I mean, they've lost Luai, huge loss, Taruva, Fisher Harris. It goes on and on and on. But these players, Talangi, Jenkins, Jack Cole, Casey McLean, young Jesse McLean had a couple of games. And, for me, I just thought these younger players stepping in, doing a job, I thought they did a really good job. Lindsay Smith, for me, really impressive. He had to stand up as a front rower. And I thought he did a really good job in that number 8 jersey. I thought he did a phenomenal job. Moses Leota, Lindsay Smith wore the 10. Moses Leota, he's been around now for almost 10 years at Penrith, and he was a real leader, still an enforcer for Penrith. From round 13, 14 onwards, it clicked. All of a sudden, the younger players just got a little bit more experience, had a few more games in them for NRL level, and all of a sudden it clicked. And Penrith didn't panic. For me, I found that really interesting. The Penrith Panthers did not panic. After round 12, Ivan Cleary was asked, can you make the finals? And he said, look, we're not in the position we want to be in right now. But every game they lost, he stayed calm. And for me, I couldn't understand. If I was him, I'd be panicking. Surely, I doubted that they could make the finals. And I think most people did. But I was really concerned. Not concerned, but at the time, I was intrigued of why every game they lost, and the more and more games that Penrith lost, Ivan Cleary sat there and looked calmer and calmer and calmer with each loss. And it's almost like he knew that this playing group would do something amazing. And that was to get from last spot after round 12 to making a prelim final. Sure, they lost the prelim final, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, they were up 14-0 in a prelim. You go from last round 12 to 14-0 up in a prelim, you've done a fucking good job, not just as a head coach, but as a club once again. And for me, I think they're going to be very, very hard to beat in season 2026. For me, it was an amazing season considering how people may feel about it for Penrith. I think because they didn't make a grand final, because they didn't win the premiership, and because they have set themselves such a high bar for the rest of rugby league. For many people, many may think it was a failure for Penrith, believe it or not, which is very, very harsh in my opinion, considering 4 premierships in a row, 5 grand finals in a row. But because they didn't make the grand final, many people will think that it was a failure. Because of the first half of the season, they were last after round 12. Many fans would consider the season a failure. For me, it was a massive tick, a massive pass. They finished the season in 7th position on the ladder. They look at this. No Fisher Harris. He's gone. One of the biggest meter eaters the game has ever seen in the NRL era. Yet they finished first in meters gained. First in meters gained. And I think credit goes to Lindsay Smith and Moses Leota, who really stood up. Liam Henry, these kind of players that just got the job done. They were 6th in errors. Completion rate, they were 3rd. Points conceded, they were 5th. I didn't check what they were in terms of points conceded after round 12, but defensively, first half of the season, they were fucking awful. Absolutely awful. So for them to climb up to 5th with points conceded, great job. Missed tackles 3rd. So defensively, things started to click after round 12. An unbelievable season from the Penrith Panthers. For me, Nathan Cleary wasn't one of his best years of the NRL. I thought he was quite disappointing in the Ashes series, to be completely honest. I thought he was really quiet. I thought Cameron Munster and Harry Grant really took control of that game alongside Reece Walsh in the spine. But of the 1, 6, 7, and 9 in the Ashes series between Australia and Great Britain, England, he was really quiet. I thought overall he had a decent year for Penrith, but I think there's a lot more better years coming. He was disappointing in Origin. He was at the end of the day. We were down 20-0 at halftime in a decider in Sydney. Nathan Cleary owned his lack of performance and owned that he didn't take control of the game. He blamed the series loss on himself after the game, which was really quite refreshing to hear. Goes to show how hard he is on himself, which is only a positive in my opinion. Such a legend of the game, in my opinion, a future immortal of the game. 2 Clive Churchill medal winners, 2 Clive Churchill medals he's won. But I just feel that in games he sort of was quiet and then involved. For me, Penrith's best win of the season was when they went to New Zealand, and it was actually after Origin 2, I think it was, in Perth. They went to New Zealand, and it was a very depleted Penrith Panthers. All the Origin players did not go to New Zealand. They stayed and they didn't want to do the extra travel. They were under all sorts of pressure at that time of the year, but Ivan Cleary trusted in the system, trusted in the Panthers culture, trusted in the development of these players. And he gave these younger kids a go, and they ended up beating the Warriors, who at the time were in the top 4, and they beat them very convincingly in New Zealand. Goes to show that you can never write off the Penrith Panthers. And I remember that game, Penrith were about $4.80 against the New Zealand Warriors. It was a baby Panthers, a very under-strength Penrith Panthers, but they won. And I think that just gave the playing group confidence and the club confidence that they can do anything on their day. And all of a sudden, after that win, they found consistency. For me, another very memorable win for Penrith was against the Gold Coast Titans. We do remember at the back end of the year, we do remember that drama there with the trainer running on the in front of Jaden Campbell, who was taking a conversion from the sideline. He ended up missing that, and then Penrith get the 40-metre field goal in the remaining minutes of that game to tie it up. They go into Golden Point, and all of a sudden Penrith win that game at Gold Coast. They had a huge lead, Penrith, and then the Gold Coast Titans scored about 22 unanswered points in that second half. But Penrith do this so well. They somehow find a way under pressure, and they did that again in that game. A couple of standout games for the Panthers. Another memorable game was obviously against the Canberra Raiders, and we know what happened there, where Nathan Cleary went for the field goal, hit the post, into the hands of Jed Stewart, who finds Ethan Strange, who ends up passing the ball to KO Weeks in the inside. Unbelievable game of football. But Penrith, even though they lost that game, fuck me, it was in Mudgee. It was such a high-quality game of football. And I remember watching that game. It was actually a game Penrith lost, but I remember watching that game going, yeah, okay, fuck, they can definitely win the comp. Just based on the high quality of the game, the way in which they were patient in attack and defence, the way in which they were willing to play the long game. Sure, they didn't get the 2 points, but the way in which they were able to hang in there against the team that ended up winning the minor premiership goes to show that the Panthers system is unbelievable. It is unstoppable. And if you're a Penrith Panthers supporter, 4 premierships in a row, and you make a prelim, you've just got to be so proud of what they achieved in 2025, considering where they were. And you've got to appreciate the sense of belief, the culture, the sense of trust that the players have within one another, the sense of trust that the coaching staff and the players have within the club. For me, it's quite rare. It seems that everyone is on the same page at Penrith. Even when things aren't going their way, every single person at that club is on the same page. And for me, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the fact that Ivan Cleary laughed and shrugged off that comment of the dynasty being over, that worried me as a fan. As a Manly fan, I thought, shit, I'd love Manly to win a comp again. It's been 2011, a long time for Manly, longest drought since they first won a premiership in 1972. And I watch something like that and I think, fuck, as a Manly fan, we could be waiting a long time because you look at Penrith, you look at how they have things in order from the top to the bottom. Everyone is on the same page, and Nathan Cleary and Isaiah Yeo, they just get better and better, not just as players, but just in terms of their leadership. Another standout game for Penrith was round one in Las Vegas against the Cronulla Sharks. It was absolutely unbelievable. There was a sweet play from a scrum. Great work from Nathan Cleary, who shifted the ball back to the left. Jack Cole ended up finding the ball to Edwards, who ended up finding the ball to Dane Laurie, who came on and played wing in that second half. And that ended up being the difference. I think Penrith only ended up winning that game by 6 points or so, but Cronulla were coming back, and Cronulla played some really good football in that game. But once again, the Penrith Panthers, their system, the way in which they work, it is an absolute privilege and an honour to watch as a rugby league fan. So for me, that is the Penrith Panthers 2025 season review. This is the Rugby League Forecast podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe on the YouTube channel and follow me on Spotify. Thank you very much.